So this is Torch Talk with Dustin Rodgers, and here we have today Mr. Hambling.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about space travel and the exploration of Mars, really. So in the introduction to space travel, so you want to go ahead and get us started on that one, Mr. Hambling?
Sure. I mean, we've been traveling to space for a while now. We've been working towards possibly inhabiting another planet. That would be a great thing. Let's see. Currently in space, the farthest object that we have in space that is man-made is Voyager 1, which was launched in 1977. And it just recently, in 2013, passed into what we call interstellar space. So that's the space between the stars. So it is out of the influence of our sun. That's pretty far away. To give you an idea, that's 138 astronomical units. So an astronomical unit is the distance from the Earth to the sun. And that's pretty far. So 138 of those. So that thing is pretty far away. In fact, it would take light about 38 minutes to get out to the spacecraft and back to us. So that's the fastest we can communicate with that spaceship. Let's see, the last manned lunar probe that we had was in 1972. So it's been a while since we've set foot on another body in space.
Right, and to add on to that moon thing, we kind of had the idea, like, I think it was 1950s, 60s time to go to space and go to the moon and all that. And I really think the reason why we did that and like why it was so fast, considering how long it's taking us to get to Mars now, was competition with Russia and all that. So maybe you want to like, or anybody really, the competition, like there's really no competition to get to Mars right now. Do you think maybe that's the reason why it's going to be a longer mission, that and the actual distance from the sun it is?
I think that certainly would have helped. The space race was a huge boon to our developing space travel and developing the technologies that we've needed to get into space. And now that that's not happening, I think we're not moving fast enough.
Yeah, there's less funding going to the actual programs and all that.
Absolutely, and I think NASA's realized some of that, and they've realized they needed to run a little bit better of a PR campaign to get people excited about science and realizing just some of the amazing stuff that they do on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. All right, so another question would be, why are we traveling to Mars? Like, what's the end-all goal for going to Mars? Like, why are we so excited to go there?
Well, I think the reasons for that are going to vary completely depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
First off, I would say for myself, just curiosity and exploration. I think that's the foundation of science. We as humans, we want to know, we want to explore, we want to go to new places, we want to see new things, we want to develop new technologies. But Mars in particular, probably because it's really the only other truly inhabitable, potentially inhabitable world that's nearby for us.
Yeah, that's really the only reason I could think of, was just because we can inhabit that world. It will take a long time to do so, but we could do it, as well as just progress in general and furthering our understanding of the universe and sciences.
Oh, sure. There's just the academic nature of it all. That would be great as well.
Yeah. And then now we're going to go into who are like the main competitors or companies that are actually currently trying to get to Mars.
Oh, well, I don't know all of them for sure.
Right.
But I know that a lot of folks have probably heard in the news about, for instance, Mars 1, which was a Dutch program. They plan to send people to Mars with, if I remember correctly, everything they would need to set up a base on Mars. But the idea was that there would be no return mission.
Yeah.
And that they were to try out for this, and it was going to be kind of like a reality TV show, and they would use the funding that they generated from the reality TV show to actually pay for the trip to Mars.
Right.
Now, I went ahead and I looked that up on the internet because I wondered, myself, if that actually had ever gone through, because it's been a while since they were talking about it. And it turns out that they've essentially admitted that it was a fiction. So there was no plan to actually do it. It was all just hype.
Yeah. There's also a lot of talk about SpaceX with Elon Musk, and I think right now they're currently working with NASA on actually how to get to Mars, what times are actually good to go, and how are they going to set up there with humans on it, because we already have the rovers on there. But SpaceX is currently working on like rockets that can self-land, which is like a big problem on Mars, because having to control that rocket from so far away will be such a challenge. And basically they're just teamed up with NASA, and that's their main focus right now.
Sure. And I think NASA's goals as of present are to attempt to get somebody on Mars sometime in the 2030s.
Yeah.
And I think they've got a pretty good roadmap for that, and we'll probably see some of that change with the incoming administration. And a lot of that's dependent on politics, so and their funding. So we don't know what's going to happen now, but the current plan for making it to Mars by the 2030s has essentially stepping off points. So the first stepping off point is to keep using the space station and getting to understand how space affects humans in long stay. How does it affect our bone density? Could we even give birth in space? There's so many questions that we have, and a lot of stuff that we're learning from the space station. Step 2 would be to attempt some sort of deeper space inhabitation, somewhere probably outside of the moon's orbit. So a little bit further away, a little bit harder to get supplies to, much more self-sustaining than even the space station itself. And then finally, all of that would culminate with lunar habitation. So the concept being that the moon's close. It's a lot easier to get to. If something goes really sideways, we can possibly get people home from there. And so that would be the first step, would be a small colony on the moon. And then if we can pull all that off, by the 2030s, hopefully actually landing a person on Mars. Now, it sounds like a long time. And even to pull all the things that I just said off by the 2030s seems pretty hard. But I think if you look at it, technically, we have the technology now that we could get somebody to Mars. But I would hazard to say that it would anyway be very safe that you would actually make it to Mars. And then once you got there, I don't know if we've really developed things enough to know how we would survive on Mars. There's a lot of questions.
So that kind of feeds into what technologies have we developed to actually help us get to Mars and sustain on Mars?
Well, I think that the space shuttle is pretty number one. I mean the space station, sorry. The space station is really number one, being able to actually have extended stays in space. But reaching Mars it's pretty difficult. You're looking, you only have certain launch windows where you can make it. You have to wait till the planet is close enough that we can get to it, and it's not going to take too long. And even when it is close, we're looking at like a 9-month travel time. So that's a long extended stay. You've got a lot of problems. You have problems like extra radiation from being in space. In space, you don't have the protection of Earth's magnetosphere and our ozone. You're exposed if a solar flare goes off and it's pointed your way, you're getting the brunt of it, whatever shielding you have on your spacecraft. So I think one of the biggest issues is probably has a lot to do with just human interdynamics. Can a small group of scientists, if that's who we're going to send, get along for 9 months and then manage to be on the surface together for who knows how many years? That's a big question. But as far as technologies go, I don't know that we're actively developing specific technologies to make it to Mars, but I think a lot of our current technologies would certainly be of use.
Recently I've read an article about the growing of food in space and how they're trying to get to like a mass production part of it to actually create produce in the space station and maybe use that in their trip to Mars, because it is a long trip and that's a lot of supplies for people. And that's just like pretty interesting how they're going to grow their own food on their way to Mars.
Sure. We would need technology to not only grow our own food, but to recycle our air. Like virtually everything that you have with you, you just have to recycle all those, all of the cycles that we have on Earth, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, right, the water cycle, all those things have to happen in a small little enclosed environment.
As well as telecommunications, which we see on the current rovers that are on Mars. We have to be able to communicate with each other if we do happen to get people on Mars.
Oh, sure. And you have to keep in mind the time it takes light to travel to wherever Mars happens to be in its orbit. That can be anywhere from a few minutes to quite a bit more. And then you've got, if you send a message to Mars, you're going to have to wait for a message back, which it may not seem a big deal, to wait 2 minutes or 6 minutes. But if something goes wrong and you need an answer about something on the surface and you send a message and they get it in 3 minutes and then turn around and send you back another message 3 minutes later, that's 6 minutes. That's a very long kind of constrained conversation.
Very high intensity there. So that kind of feeds onto the current rovers and satellites that are near and around Mars and on Mars.
Yeah, so Mars has a lot more stuff on it than you would think. Yeah. There's been a lot of missions to Mars. The British, the Soviets have sent missions to Mars. I think both of those have failed. I don't think they actually ever got anything to land and send anything back. But we've had the Pathfinder, the Sojourner, Opportunity Rover, the Curiosity, the Spirit. So there's a lot of stuff on Mars. And I mean, currently, the Opportunity and the Curiosity are looking for life and water on Mars, mm-hmm. and that's kind of what's going on right now. I know the Opportunity rover has made it about 25 miles since 2010 when it landed, and it's still going strong. The Spirit, which got stuck, I think it sent its last transmission around like 2010. It got stuck, so it's no longer in use.
Yeah. So that's kind of like where telecommunication comes in. Like they lost, and they didn't lose communication with it, I don't think, but they got stuck to the point where if they continued to try to communicate with it, it'd burn up a lot of power, and that's just like another thing. You need a lot of power.
Sure, and if you can't keep the solar panels clean, the dust that gets on there from the dust storms mm-hmm. is just going to block out the sun, and then you've got nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, dust storms feeding into kind of like problems with Mars, and that can kind of feed into like terraforming it, and like, can we actually do it, and how long would terraforming that planet actually take?
I think that's a tough question. Depending on who you ask, I think you get some very different responses. There's folks out there that say, "Oh, tomorrow we're ready to go. We could send something into the planet. We could start the terraforming process and just go with it." I think that it's a lot more complex than anybody can imagine. We understand ecology pretty well on Earth, but to think that we're going to understand ecology on a planetary scale for some place like Mars, there's going to be some curveballs thrown at us.
Yeah, because we have like terraformed on Earth, right?
Sure.
But we have no idea what's going to happen on Mars. It's a completely different planet. We have no idea.
Exactly. And we understand what's present, and we can adjust things, and then kind of hope that the outcome is what we expect. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned, the dust storms, even that's kind of different because the atmosphere on Mars is so thin mm-hmm. that a dust storm on Mars, it might look like pretty horrible, but you would hardly even feel it.
Yeah, because it's just compared to Earth's atmosphere, it's only 1 kilopascal, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and so basically 100 mile per hour wind would only feel like a 1 mile per hour wind.
Yeah, it wouldn't feel like a whole heck of a lot at all.
Yeah.
But it could certainly make it so you couldn't see.
Yeah. Let's see, terraforms. Yeah.
More about terraforming. So the problems we have with terraforming Mars kind of go back to all the different cycles we have on our planet, trying to figure out a water cycle, a phosphorus cycle, a carbon cycle. Mars has a lot of issues that we don't have on Earth. Mars is a bit smaller than Earth, so the gravity is quite a bit less. And that's going to cause a lot of problems, not only with human physiology, but also with air pressure. Because the air that we have down here by the ground that we breathe is only here in the concentration that it is because Earth's gravity holds the oxygen molecules close to the surface.
Okay.
If you have less gravity, you have a better chance for those gases to escape into space. And Mars has kind of been hit with a double-edged sword there, because it's been hit double duty because you have less gravity, and so there's going to be less gases retained to begin with, and then since it's lacking a magnetic field like the Earth has, the solar radiation comes in and hits those particles in the atmosphere, excites them, and then they zip off into space. Oof. So a lot of Mars's atmosphere has been lost because of lack of gravity, but even more probably has been lost because of the radiation.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge problem. Mm-hmm. So how do we go into combating that? I think the first thing is that we have to figure out how to produce the atmosphere that we need on Mars. Mm-hmm. Now Mars has some stuff. True, there is some water on Mars, most likely at the poles. There's some frozen carbon dioxide up there too.
Yeah.
So if we can melt that stuff, we could release carbon dioxide, which we know what that does here on Earth, right? The greenhouse effect.
Yeah.
So if we can start the greenhouse effect on Mars, we can warm the planet.
Yes.
And so that would be one of the goals, really. And people have talked about doing lots of things. There's been talks of launching missiles into Mars' surface with chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which we know are not good for the environment because they destroy ozone, but they're a greenhouse gas. So you can heat the atmosphere, but you ruin your ozone.
Yeah. Okay, so then you mentioned water on Mars near the poles. NASA's also kind of discovered these dark streaks on Mars, indicating that water might have been there at one point. So, I mean, water in the future on Mars, we do need water to survive as humans. So, like,
absolutely.
So if let's just say there wasn't any water near the poles, or it's just a minuscule amount. How would you think that we would survive to the point where?
Well, I think that you're spot on. There's no way for humans to survive or much life in general without water.
Right.
And I think there's fantastic evidence that there was water on Mars just from the geology that we've seen coming back from the photos of the rovers. I think it was there. It's hard to dispute that. One idea that I have heard floated around is, hey, why don't we lasso a large comet or a meteor that's got a lot of water on it and slam that sucker into the surface of Mars? It sounds pretty easy, but I mean, I don't know. But that would be one way we could bring water in. Shipping it from Earth, there's just no way.
Yeah.
The cost is just prohibitive. We couldn't do it. So if there's not enough to melt on the poles, then we're going to have to find some other way to get water.
Yeah. All right, and so we discussed that humans will, the idea time period would be in the 2030s at some time, and that's just kind of like a basic idea of what we have with the technology that we have currently and the funding. And then, so here's a quick hypothetical for you. Would you like to be the first person on Mars?
Oh boy, I would love to be the first person on Mars, hands down, no doubt.
Yeah.
But if you told me it was a one-way trip and I could go to Mars and never come back, Earth's a pretty nice place. I would have a hard time saying I don't ever want to be on Earth ever again.
Yeah.
Because there's an awful lot of amazing things on Earth. Just the biological diversity alone. I mean, I love rocks, don't get me wrong. I would love to explore the rocks of the Martian landscape and to see all of the sights and everything on Mars, but there's just not as much, there's no diversity there. I think that you would eventually get tired of that, and I would miss Earth, I think, too much.
Yeah, so it'd be like a psychological strain on you. Yeah. And then, just to pull from a pop culture reference, if you were in a Martian situation, stuck on Mars alone, how would you survive?
How would I survive? I guess it would depend on what I've got with me.
Right. Let's just say you have the base that they set up in the movie, and there's a lot of poop everywhere. And somehow you have a potato.
A potato? Okay, well, so you eat the potato. First you're going to need some duct tape.
Yeah.
We would, I think the problems with Mars are really, there's three main problems, and I don't know how you would surmount those without some serious technology and gear with you. Number one, you got no magnetosphere.
Yeah.
And so that's what protects you from all the harmful solar radiation and boiling away of your atmosphere. And so without a magnetosphere, you're pretty much stuck to living either underground somewhere or in some sort of a fabricated magnetosphere. We generate it with electricity. We create a very small part of the planet, or maybe the whole planet, I don't know. And then the atmosphere. So I guess if you got a spacesuit, it'd be okay for a while, but then you have to think about how are you going to get oxygen.
Yeah.
Well, if you got water, you can make oxygen. You can split the water molecule. You can get some oxygen. You can get hydrogen. You could put them together, make rocket fuel, and go home, I suppose. And then the other problem that you're going to have is temperature. It's cold.
It is, yeah.
So how are you going to increase the temperature enough to stay warm without at least electricity on a planetary-wide scale? You've got to start the greenhouse effect. Exactly. It's the only way. Maybe we can send them some of our carbon.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good idea. Yeah, we just take the carbon that we have overabundance of and just send it on to Mars.
Yeah. So it would cost more in carbon to send it there than we would get rid of, right?
True.
We'd be making more pollution from the rocket than we would get from...
Well... That's I think that's about it, really. I think that's the end of our first podcast about space travel.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hambling.